people are like, man, I'm paying $75, $85 for this venue fee. And
Hmm.
it's just like they want to see like the value in what they're paying for with that. Because a
Yeah.
lot of people they don't see like especially for these larger events, like there's a ton of costs that go into I mean that's going beyond like the local scene, but that's something that a lot of people don't think about.
Hello, and welcome to the Absolute Guard podcast.
Yep, we're the podcast that chronicles the past and the present of the fighting game community and bring on various perspectives from Arizona. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/Spiral Series, YouTube at youtube.com/Spiral Series, and on Apple Podcasts and Spotify under Absolute Guard. To all of you watching and listening, we appreciate all of you that have liked and subscribed, liked and commented, or tweeted and retweeted. This is episode 6, and this is another one of our episodes featuring drinks. I'm Benny, also known as AK Grandmaster B, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, the man who loves to use Chun Stand Fierce, John. How you doing today, John?
Pretty good, pretty good. Chun Stand Fierce is good in pretty much every game that I've seen her play through. Like
Yep,
that is her button. And
yep,
in
yeah,
Street Fighter 6, you can actually convert off it. It actually seems really cool. You can go Stand Fierce and then switch into stance and then do a low short afterwards. It's pretty dumb.
nice,
But
nice. So,
yeah.
what are you drinking today?
I am drinking a Lagunitas Maximus Colossal IPA.
Oh,
I
nice. I don't think I've had that one.
the fun facts and what ties this back to fighting games is that I won this in the fighting game tournament. Our locals sometimes they come with prizes of the alcoholic nature. So,
Nice.
what's new and
Yeah,
exciting,
see,
Benny?
uh, nothing really. I mean, I'm just, just actually just woke up, but that's the life of a night owl. It's my weekend, so pretty stoked about that.
I feel
Like
like
I
I
said,
can. It's later in the day for me, so I can have a beer. But do you have something to drink for early morning here for you?
yeah. So I got me some OJ. It's in my Tetris cup that I got from what was that Zapcon from a few years ago. Got fourth place in the tournament there, so yeah,
Nice.
pretty cool. Yeah, and that's OJ with all the pulp. I don't drink. There's no pulp orange juice here.
That's
Okay,
where
all the pulp.
the all the nutrients are, man. You got to chew your drink.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody said one time like I don't want to drink grass, and I'm just like, well then don't drink grass. Like I'm not drinking grass. This is just OJ with pulp. Yeah. So today we just wanted to talk about I guess a lot of the some of the local events that we've been involved in because as we've talked about before, like we've been involved in the scene for about 10 plus years, both as players and TOs. We've done various events here in Arizona, so we were going to touch a little bit on that, and then basically just I guess kind of help people with starting locals because that's something that gets asked in our Facebook group. I'd say randomly just from different people in uh, other parts of Arizona, like some random city, Yuma, whatever. People will be like, "Hey, I'm trying to start this in the middle of nowhere. Like, what should I do?" So, something we were going to talk about today.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Do we want to start by just talking about a little bit about our background and some TO experiences that we've had over the years?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I guess go ahead and we'll start with you. And I mean, because you were an 09 or two, right?
Yep, I started
Technically,
in
yeah.
'09.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I guess just touch briefly on a couple of the things that you've done in terms of like local events, and
Hmm.
then we can kind of we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. So I want to say it was 2000, and so I started playing in 2009 when Street Fighter 4 came out, and I spent a good, I want to say 2 years. I think it was 2 years. Yeah, 2 years
Mm,
of just playing the game and learning how to play fighting games and getting to understand how tournaments worked and were run. Because frankly, I had never really played in a tournament before. Like I did high school sports and stuff, and by and large, like the tournament brackets were single elimination, and they didn't have, there were courts and stuff. I played tennis rather.
okay.
So there were courts and stuff, and there were some analogies, but overall, like the coaches handled most of that stuff. So the actual like idea around running a tournament was still pretty foreign to me. And then getting to Evo, my first year at Evo was incredibly magical, and I got to see the huge reception and resurgence that the fighting game community had both after 2009 Evo and 2010 Evo. 2009, I didn't go to Evo, but I got to see. I was part of the growth burst, and then 2010, I got
Yeah,
to see the growth burst firsthand from the inside. Um, so around 2012, I believe, was when I started realizing that every year after Evo, there's always a burst of community activity because it's the thing that gets people hype, And then at
yep,
that point, streaming was just starting to become a thing, and people were finding more and more about the community. And I was like, oh shoot, people could probably use like a way in, a way
yeah,
to join the community while being welcoming, and not being intimidated by the, do you have to buy a stick? Do you have to put up money to fit in, yeah, all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to see if I could create like a welcoming tournament for Evo, for people that had just seen Evo and wanted to join the local Arizona community. So
yeah.
I came up with a tournament idea called "Here Comes the New Challengers," which was, I was trying to be on brand as far as like it's a free tournament. It's going to be as many
Yeah.
games as you guys want. Any games that you saw at Evo, there's going to be a bring your own console area like Evo had. Um, and it ended up being a pretty good turnout. I think we ended up with like 100 people total,
Oh, wow,
um,
100 people, like, for
for the
the
first
first one,
one.
like, after Evo? Wow.
Yeah, yeah, and like we were spread out across multiple games. Like Anime was there, 3D was there, Street Fighter was there, and Team Hazmat was streaming it. And over time, like people thought Here Comes Some New Challengers" was kind of a dumb name, because it was kind of long in the mouth,
Yeah,
long to say, right? And
yeah.
so they ended up calling it MujiCon instead. And
Ah,
at the time, my handle was Samuji, and then that's a very weeb name, and people just shortened it to Muji. And at that point, like again, I had been in the community for about 2 years, and so like people knew who I was at that point. I wasn't by any means like a outgoing or strong personality in the FGC at that point, but they knew who I was at least, and they all wanted to like the local scene was actually really supportive of me running tournaments, and it was kind of interesting getting to see what that looked like, uh, from the TO perspective. And it's not like I ran it on my own either. Like I had the idea, and I did a bunch of social media promotion and stuff. And there's my cat. Um,
yeah,
and but the actual like running of the bracket and running of the event, like the person who taught me how to do that and did most of it at the time, was Terrence Carter, or T Dot.
okay,
And so we partnered up, and I had always wanted to make my own brand called Spiral Series. And so MujiCon was like the first inception of that. And so like the stream that we run on, the YouTube channel that we use for this podcast even is still to
yeah.
this day Spiral Series. But T Dot was a founding member of the Spiral Series, so to speak, and that was our first event.
Nice, nice.
So,
T-Dot's always been helpful at events, like, if he's helping run brackets or whatever,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
he's always around, always down to help. For those, I know you've told me this before, but for those that don't know, what's the inspiration behind Spiral Series? Like,
Spiral
what does that mean?
Series. Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
like, what
the
does that mean?
um I really liked Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, which is an anime that was all about spirals. It was a lot about drills and how drills are spirals, and spirals are double helixes and DNA and woven into the human spirit and wanting to move forward in every possible way. Um,
Yeah.
and so that anime hit me really well. Sumuji is also a name I took from another anime that has to do with a spiral motion. So
Oh,
I
okay.
just I ended up really liking the spiral motif and kind of going with that from there. I put series at the end of it because I thought this was going to be a tournament series. I will just call Spiral Series the tournament series, and that didn't end up happening because I ended up running way too many tournaments over the years.
Nice, nice. Like, so yeah, I mean that's something actually I learned today about the whole MujiCon thing because I always just thought MujiCon was just something that was started, but like to actually hear you talk about like its origins, like it started as something else before.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's news to me today because I didn't actually know that. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I always am really like tepid about bringing up MujiCon because it seems really egotistical because it has my name in it.
Yeah,
But it really it was kind of nice because the community kind of adopted it and they picked the name for me essentially.
yeah,
And so like it seems arrogant at first blush, but the community was really like
yeah.
they I didn't pick that basically, and that felt really nice to know that the
Yeah.
community was supportive at that time.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's something that I always bring up or I always like mention. Like I think the name's great, and it's like you said, it could sound egotistical because it does include your name, right? Like it does.
Yeah, yeah,
Somebody's
totally.
like, oh, why would you want to talk about your tribe that involves your name? Like, well, why not, kind of thing. But I don't really see it as that. Like I always saw it as something that was kind of like endearing and something that was like I guess kind of like supportive of you and like a reflection of you and the fact that it was a uh, community driven event, like a free event. Because that's something that a lot of people like, when they hear about TOs, they always think about like all the money that people make or this and that. And I was like, a lot of us that have done this, we do it for the love of the game or the love of the community. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't get into TOing because I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna start making money on the side. Like, nah, that was never my thought process.
I think a big thing at the time is like the stigma that we were because like nowadays it's always an ongoing debate about how are fighting games too hard and is the community not welcoming to newcomers and whatnot. But there was an actual like generational battle between 09ers and OGs when Street Fighter 4 first came out. And so we were battling a different kind of stigma or a different kind of gatekeeping back then. And so MujiCon and was kind of by nature of it being free, it was
Yeah,
about making sure that people weren't intimidated by the competitive aspect of it per se, while still
yeah,
while still trying to take all the good parts of the joy of competition and stuff. But um, nowadays, I think that there isn't a huge need for that notion anymore, just because the FGC is incredibly welcoming and the fact that you don't
yeah,
again like the big problem was getting people to come out to locals
yeah,
because online wasn't viable back then. And so the putting yourself in a brand new situation in a brand new like environment with people with nobody and stuff, that's incredibly daunting for a lot of gamers, I think. And especially
yeah,
when the alternative is just staying home and playing the game that you want to play competitively anyway. It's just that online wasn't viable back then, and then we were also dealing with the 09er and OG generational gap at that time. So
yeah.
yeah.
Exactly. I mean, there's always that in kind of intimidation factor too. Like some people are like, if it's a free tournament, some people are like, well, I don't have any skin in the game. I don't, I haven't put anything up, right? Like other than maybe a venue fee. Whereas if even for $5, some people are like, well, that's just $5 I'm gonna lose. And it's just like, I mean, whether that's, if that's their mentality, that's fine and that's understandable, especially if you're like just new and being like introduced to the scene. Like I get that. But a free entry tournament, like you said, like it brings out people that, maybe normally wouldn't like get out of their house and, do those kind of things.
Even back then, it was 2011 or 12 or something, right? And that
Mhm.
was around when YouTube was first starting to become a thing. So the idea of people meeting each other in person after talking on the internet was still a little foreign to the average society. Nowadays, like we have a video going right now of us talking into some mics, and then we can have a parasocial relationship with our audience and whatnot. But those concepts didn't exist back then. And so the idea of meeting somebody that you met online in person was already daunting enough.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Just
yeah,
different
I get
era.
it. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So that was my kind of gateway into the TO scene though. Like what was your first event that you ran here, Benny?
So for Arizona, like I touched briefly on the episode, like when we were talking with Rick about how I got started. That was back in Alaska when
Alaska,
I
yeah.
was there. That was in 2010, and that was more kind of out of necessity,
Hmm.
just because and frustration because like we'd run tournaments and because the scene was local and we were a bunch good friends and buddy buddy, like things would run a lot longer than they should have. But Yeah, I ended up moving here March of 2012. I wasn't able to get involved in the scene in like a TO aspect just because of, moving to a new place, work, family stuff. My schedule didn't exactly match up. So um, for the first couple years, I think I attended the first Ranbat of like that season when I got here, and then I wasn't able to attend another event for like a year and a half, other than I think Evo that year. And then, man, I'd have to think. I'm trying to think of when I actually started doing something here. Because I've always I was always down to like help out, run brackets, those kind of things. But I'm trying to think. I think it was actually the Scrub Cup towards like the end of Street Fighter 4's era that I wanted to do something, and it was more like you said, that idea I also got from the Alaska scene because it was just something like we'd always there's always it's when it comes to tournaments there's always players that are consistently at the top, right? And the idea behind the Scrub Cup was to take out certain players, ban certain players from playing, so that other people had have their time to shine. And granted, the name itself wasn't one that went over well over here in Alaska. Like we didn't care. It was just like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
You guys didn't do well. You're a bunch of scrubs, whatever. Um, but it was one of those things like, yeah, we wanted to give shine to some of those players because I mean, you enter tournaments and it's just like your tournament run for that day could go well, it could go bad, and some of it could be just a bad bracket. Maybe you run into the guy first that's been top three consistently, and then you go into losers and you run into somebody else that's been like top eight consistently, and it's just like, well, now I'm 0-2 and I'm out of this, right?
Yeah,
And you
and
had to
another
play.
thing is like a lot of tournaments at that time had been seeding their brackets based off of previous results, right? And so you were pretty
Mhm.
much always, if you were an 0-2 kind of person, you were pretty much always guaranteed to get matched up with a killer seeding wise
Yeah.
immediately, and it kind of stratifies that gap between the top performers and less so, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, I mean, it's a tough out even for like even the middle of the road players. Like, you're gonna get paired up with somebody that's probably done well just because, like you said, based on seating, because
Hmm.
you know uh, those kind of things. So, like, yeah, for me, the Scrub Cup was just it was a way to ban certain players from our scene from participating, and then giving the shine to the other players that maybe had gone 0-2 or 1-2 like regularly in tournaments.
So I was fortunate to actually be a part of that event, and I think I ran the stream for it. But I do
Yeah.
remember there were some criteria for who you banned, and it was tied to another event, if I recall correctly. Right?
Well, it was actually tied to like the Ranbats for like Street Fighter 5 completely. Like I ended up going through
Street Fighter 4, right?
challenge, yeah, Street Fighter 4. Or, so yeah, Street Fighter 4. So I went through like every challenge bracket I could find, run by like said 3S, run by yourself, anything I could find for Street Fighter 4, and like I basically went in there and was looking for everybody that placed top 8 even one time, because I wanted to have like just a general cutoff point where people couldn't question it, right?
Sure.
Because a lot of times, like I could make a list and I can like put people together and just say you're banned, and they'll be like, why? Well, I think you're too good. Well, I didn't want it to be like that. It was like I looked through all the results, like I don't know how many brackets it was, and I took down every name that made a top 8, and it didn't matter how many times. Like if you made a top 8, like I was gonna ban you. Like that was just the cutoff. And I personally like I wasn't trying to personally ban myself, but I had made a couple top eights, so I was banned naturally. So, and that was just the criteria. And I remember who was the one person that actually even said something about that was Louis, was scumbag. Like I guess he had made one top 8 as Blanca in some Ranbat or some tournament, and he was on the list. And I remember when I like started to promote this and I was like, hey, I'm gonna run this event. This is the banned list. And he was like, why am I banned? And I was like, well, because you made top 8. He goes, yeah, that was like one time. I was like, well, I don't care. That's my criteria. I'm sticking to it, and sorry, you can't participate.
Hmm. That's interesting. I actually ran into Louis this past weekend at Evo, so that's kind of interesting to hear him come up again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's
I
super
mean,
cool.
yeah, so that was just the main criteria, and like I said, because I figured like even if you didn't make top 8 consistently, like if you were good enough to get there at some point, even whether it was bracket magic or bracket luck or whatever that they like, I just figured that that was a great cutoff point. So Yeah, that's pretty much where that started, and um, I think the main challenge I had, like I alluded to earlier, was just the name itself. So
Oh
like
yeah.
when I brought the name up, and I was like, hey, I wanted to run this. I got some feedback that were like, why does it have to be Scrub Cup? And for me, like I'm like I'm not exactly like OG, like, Scott and Rick and the other guys that, I wasn't involved in the scene at that time. I'm a '09er. I got into the competitive scene at that time, but I still kind of have this like older mentality where like, honestly, I don't care what it's called. You can call it whatever you want, right? It's just like, it's more about the concept and the idea behind what the tournament is. But I guess to combat that feedback, I was receptive to people like what people were saying, and I even put like a poll up in our group, and I was like, "Hey, what do you guys want to name this instead? Like beginner brawl or whatever?" I don't know. It was like I took some feedback, tried to see if people really wanted to change it or if they cared, and like I don't know if people just wanted to like vent about it, but people did say like, I think it's the meaning or this and that, and I was like, well, I can understand, but
I mean, I've seen
this is what I'm
positives
running
and
with.
negatives to that ultimately. Like, one of the lasting impacts that particular tournament had over our scene is that the winner of that tournament, his name is Thrasher Mike. He
Hmm.
goes on to be one of the best Street Fighter V players, and to the point where I think he's considered the best in Street Fighter V in Arizona right now. And
Yeah,
I've had long conversations with him about his journey, and he's every time he always brings up the Scrub Cup specifically as
yeah,
one of his motivating factors for continuing to be better, because he what it did was you had your ban list, right? And then that created
yeah,
anybody that wasn't banned, they were automatically like, well, how come I'm not part of the cool kids club? And some people will take offense to that, and other people will rise
yeah,
to that as a challenge, right? And Mike is
exactly.
somebody I believe who actually rose to that and said, I want to be, I'm not a scrub and I want to be better than that. And he ultimately carries that, over a decade of further of playing.
Yeah,
So in some ways, like, I understand where it's coming from, being like, that's demeaning and you shouldn't be calling beginners
yeah,
scrubs because they're fundamentally different.
yeah,
Scrub is a mentality and it's not necessarily a skill level. It's about whether or not you take feedback well, or you can reflect on your play very well, or blame the game or
yeah,
blame other people instead. But the um I feel like if it wasn't negatively charged, you wouldn't have gotten a response out of Mike, and I don't think it would have carried the same kind of weight that it still carries today. So it's kind of
yeah,
a double-edged sword.
yeah. I remember being in that. I mean, I got some feedback from people, even that day, like directly after, whether it was from Thrasher that day
Hmm.
after he won, or whether that was, I think second place was Deranged Tyrant Carlos.
Yeah, yeah,
And I just remember, like, it was like, "Oh, man, I'm really glad that you did this." Like, obviously Thrasher was hyped up because he's like, "Yeah, I've never been in that kind of situation." Like, I was nervous, like, but it was hype at the same time. And it's just like, you don't know what that situation's like because, like, if you're going 0-2, 1-2, 2-2 in tournaments, like, you're never making it into those deeper sides of the bracket and being the featured part of Street. Like, oh, you're in losers finals now,
yeah. If I could
that kind of thing.
underline that, actually, the back then, again, this is what, 2015, maybe
Yeah,
2015, possibly 2014. And you know, I mentioned it, back in 2012 or whatever, streaming was still becoming a thing. So by the
yeah,
time Scrub Cup had come around, streaming had become more established, but
yeah,
we had figured out that in order to actually run a tournament in a well organized way, you only stream the winners bracket. So if you think about it
yeah,
from the Scrub Cup perspective and the people that attended and did well there, if they go 0-2 or 1-2 every tournament, they're never really getting an opportunity to play on stream. Even if it's
yeah,
early in the bracket, they don't get a chance to do that because they get eliminated so quickly. All right, because they get eliminated once, and then maybe they'll get their one shot on stream. Who knows? And then they play in losers for the rest of the time. And then when it's losers, they don't get a
yeah,
chance to be on stream at all. And so I remember, as someone running the stream at Scrub Cup, like, getting to see players that just wouldn't ordinarily be in the stream situation. Again, it would be like second round or something, so it wouldn't be high stakes match wise, but the stream would create that additional pressure because back then that was so foreign and new to all of us. Um,
yeah.
so I think your event exposed that to a lot of people that wouldn't get the chance to ordinarily as well.
Yeah, yeah. I went to go look it up real quick. That was actually 2015. So yeah, that
2015?
was three years after I'd been into the scene here.
Yeah.
Like I said, the first couple years I couldn't do too much just because of work schedule. So that was something that that I had put together. And yeah, like the response from it, like I wish I would have did something like that for Street Fighter Five. But I mean, at the time, like it was something that I was kind of real proud of, and I think even like Thrasher, because I remember playing Thrasher in like Street Fighter 4 tournaments, and like we'd run in the bracket, and I would beat him, and like I think he played was it Dudley and Akuma at different points.
Yeah, yeah, he
Um,
played those two.
yeah, and I could tell he was new, but at the same time, like he always had that hunger, so to like kind of throw him into that situation, and then just to see him thrive, and then like see the other players, like you said, like be put in those situations for the first time, and be see how they responded, and what's come from it. Like I always thought that that was pretty awesome.
My favorite memory of that was when Lurker was on the stream and she was playing Jury, who
Mm,
nobody played Jury in Street Fighter 4 locally as well, but in general nobody played Jury except for a couple like real character specialists. But she really wanted to play Jury, and she was still new to fighting games at the time. And then she got put on stream, which is a rarity I think for her at that time in her skill level, and she did well. She did really well. And I think she was excited to be on stream. She was excited to play that match. And I remember the smile after. I think she even lost on the stream,
yeah,
but she was so happy to have played and been able to be on that stage. I think that's how I recall it, at least. Lurker may remember
yeah.
something differently, and maybe I'll reach out to her at some point. But I remember her being happy that she got to play in that setting, and that setting that you helped create, Benny.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, that was something that I was involved in. Yeah, so we touched briefly on like I'm sorry, the origins of MujiCon for you. Then I mean, yeah, Ranbats, like that might be a discussion for a later time. But what are some other things that you've been involved in here? Maybe that people might know about.
Yeah. So the MujiCon stuff was like my intro into tournaments, and then after that, I started helping a lot with Team Hazmat as far as running the brackets there. And ultimately, that was like a giant party half the time. So it's not like I busted my ass per se. It was just me learning the
Yeah,
ropes. I ran a
yeah,
couple of high profile tournaments with them, and then uh, Spiral Series ended up taking point on the Rambats in Arizona, and we ran, I want to say, 3 seasons of Rambats, possibly two. I don't remember at this point.
yeah, yeah. I want to say it was
Rambats,
two for sure, two for sure, maybe three. I'm not exactly sure.
there's a longer explanation for what a Ranbat is, but for our audience, it's a tournament that it's a part of a series of 5, and so you have seasons of 5 tournaments, and they all kind of stack up together. Um, so we did that for a couple of years, and that runs bi-weekly, and so it was actually kind of taking a lot out of me. At that point,
Mm,
we had like we were like we're fortunate now in that there's plenty of internet cafes and whatnot, but back then we did have to like provide our own setups, and so
yeah,
constantly procuring the setups, constantly lugging my computer around and like um to stream it and stuff like that, and basically putting in the long hours to run the Rambats kind of wore on me after a little bit, and I ended
yeah,
up going back towards more like one-off tournaments. I think the big thing that people remember me the most for after the Rambat era would be uh, the boot camps for when Street Fighter V first came out.
yeah,
Um, so that would be 2016, I believe, February of 2016, probably closer to March.
yeah,
Um, and the boot camps are just they were a event format that was less geared towards a tournament and more about promotion and demotion stations. And so what you did is
yeah,
you had five stations ranked in skill level, and each of those 5 stations would have a certain number of players on them. And
yeah,
basically, you'd play with that group of people, and then whoever was the best would play a promotion match to go up to the next station above, and whoever was the worst would have to go play a demotion match to go down to the station below. And so the game plan was just to make sure that everybody was on a station they belonged at, and they were getting games with people of equal skill level. And that
yeah,
wasn't a new concept. That was something that Saber had pioneered for Street Fighter 4, and I wanted to kind of strike while the iron was hot. While when Street Fighter 5 had just first come out, um,
Yeah,
and that was always a tough one because you had to rank people, but in a game that had just come out. And I was fortunate enough that I was experienced enough with the game in advance to know that stuff. But there was
yeah,
always some mistakes here and there. Like people were up way too high in certain places because I weighted them really highly because they were good at 4, and that
yeah.
you know that wasn't always the case for Street Fighter 5.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of like the format too is like, in a way, it would naturally kind of weed itself out, right? So if you were at a tournament, or I mean, if you were at a
Yeah.
station that was too high for your level, like, yeah, you were probably gonna get bodied for that whole like whatever rotation, and then it was just like you're in the demotion match, and now you're fighting for your life to stay there, and it's just like, yeah, because I think that's what happened with me at one point. It's like I was on station one, and then I got dropped down to like I don't know 3 or 4, because in total I think you had 10, right? I think we had 10 stations.
Oh, was it 10?
Or was it?
Wow.
I don't know if it was 8 or 10. It was one of the two. I just
Oh wow,
remember
there were that
we
many
had both.
people. Yeah, there were like 50
Yeah,
people who entered that
yeah,
thing. I forgot. Yeah, it was bigger than I
yeah,
thought. I remember.
yeah. Because we had both
Yeah.
sides of TGZ filled up at that point, and
Yeah.
yeah, because I just remember I was kind of stuck at like 2 and 3, like whether I was promotion or demotion or whatever, and um, our previous guest, or our first guest, Jeff Oldman River, he was constantly on one. I think he was playing Birdie at the time, and
Yeah. Yeah.
then and there would be an influx of people up and down, and like a natural progression of like kind of like settling where you should be. And yeah,
Yeah.
that was one of my favorite things to be a part of, because like you did get a lot of games into like in a different kind of setting. Like I had never been involved in anything like that, so I thought it was a good way to one get in a lot of games against people, and then if I'm not mistaken, I think the format you had was like kind of like winner stays on, right? So like if you won,
Yep.
then the next person would step up and they would get their chance to try to win.
Yep. Yep. And the idea was like everybody collaborates to beat the winner essentially because you're like I wanted to promote conversation more than anything else. But I think
Yeah,
if I could go back and shit on my own event, I think one of the big drawbacks there was that the game had just come out. And so because of that, there wasn't a lot of conversation to be had. And I know that sounds like
yeah,
contradictory, or like it seems like it would be the opposite. But what happened was everybody was still trying to learn how to play. And so they didn't
yeah,
really, there wasn't a lot of constructive conversation going on because the game was still so new. People were still
yeah,
discovering things. And so I thought, oh, it's in the discovery phase. This will be great because then, people can share their discoveries with each other. But in reality, it was stuff like, people were still figuring out the muscle memory for block string timings or figuring out their own combos and stuff. And so,
yeah.
like, in hindsight, I don't think I would have run the tournament. I would have run that event as soon after launch as I did, because I think that on the one hand, it was a good idea to strike while the iron was hot. I don't think we would have gotten 50 people a year into Street Fighter 5. By then, everybody had dropped it. But on the flip
Yeah,
side, the actual like, hey, let's practice really, really hard and pick apart this game, that didn't happen as
mm,
cleanly as I'd hoped it would. And then the other like unfortunate side effect was that when people were stagnant, but they still relied
mm,
on like like a core basic set of skills,
yeah,
they would just stay on one station. And so week after week, they just show up and get beaten up by the same person who happened to be running that station every day. So it was really hard to, to keep it not stagnant without the players being completely familiar with the game. So I look back positively on it. I think that a lot of people look back on it and think of that as a really strong way to open the game up, when the game launched and everything. It's just that I I think I would have more success running it now, even with a smaller scene than I did at launch overall.
okay. Well, yeah, I mean that's good to know, because I was actually thinking like when Street Fighter 6 comes out, you know, boot camp again, right? Like
Oh
so it's
no,
good.
yeah,
It's good that you got that out there. So it's just like if you want to run boot camp, like John may do it at some time. Just don't expect it at the beginning of the scene, or you
yeah.
can always
Actually,
start it yourself, right?
if there's a way for me to say this to people, because I think people just assume that I run all the Street Fighter 5 events now and that I'm
Yeah,
going to run the Street Fighter 6 events, and that's not true. Is that I have no intention
yeah,
of actually running any Street Fighter 6 events. I'm hoping that somebody else takes takes the torch. And because the reality is,
Yeah,
I think everyone's going to scramble to be the TO for Street Fighter 6 when it comes out because it's going to be so hot. And so
yeah,
I don't want to get in the middle of that. I want somebody else to take point. And there's
yeah,
already a couple of like really strong candidates and people that might even come out of retirement to do it. You know?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, like, I've thought about some things that I'd like to do. I just don't know how involved I wanna be or, or whether I wanna do anything at all at this point. But,
Sure, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess it's a different topic too in terms of, like, watching out for people that are gonna kinda spring up out of nowhere. So, but that's something different. So, because
Yeah.
there are some shady tournament organizers out there that are looking to make quick cash or something like that.
You know,
I guess just go
I
ahead.
brought that up to our burgeoning Street Fighter 5 scene, and everybody was like, they kind of reacted negatively to it. It was like you're just being
Yeah,
paranoid. It's not a shame if people want to make money off of the scene, off
yeah,
of the running tournaments and stuff. And I'm like, that's fair. But you guys weren't around
yeah.
back when the people that were trying to make money were trying to make money off the players specifically. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. Like, there are going to be people that are going to be predatory, or I don't know. Maybe that's too harsh of a word, but more just like, they are trying to. Like, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with making money if 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 that's
No,
what
I
you want to do.
agree. Yeah, I
It's
think we're at
just
the point now where it's possible, but the money has to come from somewhere besides the scene, besides the fighting game
exactly.
players.
Exactly, or
Um,
the prize pot, like, that's kind of what I was alluding to, is just, like, that's the big thing, is, like, you'll see people like, "Hey, it's $10 to enter the tournament," and then it's just like, "Oh, what's the prize?" "Oh, well, you get these generic iPods, or you get this venue's whatever, gift card or something," and it's just like, people don't want that, like, I mean, I guess the vast majority, I would think, don't want that, like, they want, "Where's the money that I'm putting into the pot? Where is that going?" Right?
yeah, it's tougher now with online tournaments because like post pandemic tournament requirements have kind of changed a lot of what people perceive for what is
Yeah.
acceptable at a tournament. Like you know how I mentioned I'm drinking this beer because I got it as a prize for winning a tournament, right?
Yeah.
um like there has been significant shift in what the prize structure looks like with online tournaments and with now post pandemic tournaments. But I think there are some base ground rules that I'd love to go into with you, probably towards the end of this podcast if we want, about like what it takes to start an event and what it takes to differentiate a legitimate event versus a less so event.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, besides, what were we just talking about? Oh, we
Well,
were
so we
talking
were
about
talking
the,
about my Street Fighter 5 boot camp, but I'm curious about your next phase or next step in the tournament organizing world. What did you run after
um,
Scrub Cup?
so Scrub Cup was 2015. I don't think I did anything in 2016. And then, other than, helping out here and there, whatever I could do. Oh no, that was, yeah, during that time, that's when I was helping out with, some of our big events here that were hosted by other people, like, the undefeated events, hosted
Yeah,
by Angelic, for the Marvel scene. And then, during that time, I think 2015 and 2016 was when, Rewired in Tucson, held by, Driftwood, and and his partner, I think his name was Justin. Um, I helped out with those events, and
yeah.
then
And when you
to
say you helped
take
out, it wasn't just you; it was your whole family, right? Like your daughters and your
yeah.
wife helped too.
Yeah, so yeah, my kids and my wife were helping out. 2015, I don't recall like how involved we were in that, other than maybe running brackets and setup breakdown, that kind of thing. 2016, we were all in there. Like, my kids and my wife were at the registration desk, handing out badges and doing stuff like that, selling balls energy drink.
Oh, Ball's
And
energy drink. I
t-shirts.
haven't heard that in a long time. That was before Red
Yeah,
Bull basically took over the FGC.
yeah, selling is helping to sell T-shirts or whatever at the front. I was running brackets like all day that first day. I think I ran like, I don't know, 8 hours worth of brackets, and then I had to go play as well. And like, yeah, I just remember being so tired, but like, it was fun. Like, just seeing that huge crowd of people, and like, being involved in that.
Can I
Um,
take a brief detour and talk about the great gamer drink war of the 2015s and 2016s? It was like it was like Balls was had like the legacy, that was the legacy gamer drink, is that everybody drank Balls, right?
yeah,
And then Monster Energy tried to get in on it, and I remember Team Hazmat partnering up with the Monster people and putting like,
Mm.
um, he even put some Monster reps on the stream once, and that was a very interesting experiment. And then Red Bull started sponsoring players, and then it basically butted Monster and Balls completely out of the market. And Red Bull's basically been the
Yeah.
the the bastion of the FGC for a long time for the gamer drinks.
Yeah, yeah, they've been involved in a lot of events. I mean, I know that they were in Undefeated. Like I remember they had Red Bull stuff at Undefeated, and
Yeah,
then they're on a much larger scale too with the FTC sponsor, like you said, sponsoring player like Bonchan and doing the was it the
Dashi Kane.
Kumite? Like they,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
Kumite.
the
I went to the Kumite in Las Vegas, and it was an extremely well run event. That was really
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I
So
still have a
yeah,
bunch of the Red Bull swag they gave me. One of these days, I should show it on stream. They gave me like a lot of boxing club themed. Like I have a boxing glove bag, even though I don't own a pair of boxing gloves, but it's got
yeah.
Red Bull Kumite on it, and it's got towels in it and stuff. It's so cool. Anyway, that
Oh,
was a big tangent. That was a big tangent about Red Bull. Red Bull is super tight, but anyway. So yeah, you were at Undefeated and Rewired, and back then, you know,
oh,
you were playing a bunch of
yeah.
tournaments as well as running brackets and exhausted, right?
Yeah, so helping out, yeah, I was helping out with those events and yeah, that last Rewired event in 2016, like yeah, I ran a bunch of brackets. I also did well in the tournament surprisingly. I just um but then after that, I was actually looking it up. I ran a random team tournament at the start of 2017. I called it New Year's Retribution. I had like the picture of Show Nuff from The Last Dragon. That's like an older movie for some of the old heads out there. But and I did that random team tournament, and part of what spurned me from that was that said 3S Abe had ran a team tournament himself like a few months earlier, and the nature of team tournaments in themselves, right, is like you find your buddies, like or the top players might collaborate, right, and you're gonna have a lot of like top heavy teams, favored teams, right? And I don't remember who was in the team composition for Abe's tournament. I think it was like Mocha and Yusuf had teamed up even, or I don't know. Maybe I got those mixed up, but I just remember there was a real top heavy team, right? And there's nothing wrong with like the competitive nature. Of course, everybody wants to win, right? But for me, it's just like for for everybody else, like I wanted to basically have a way for people to play with, I guess, other players that they wouldn't normally team up with. So the idea behind it was to do a random 3v3 tournament, and so I promoted it, and I explained like what the format was, and when everybody was there, the only thing that I was worried about was like if we didn't have like a clean multiple of three, because then somebody's
Yeah,
gonna be left out, right?
totally.
So thankfully, like I think everything worked out, and like I didn't even have to participate myself. Um, but what I ended up doing is like, once everybody was here and everybody was registered, I took I personally looked at the list and was like, okay, who are the top 8 players here? And I was gonna make them captains. And I think I, asked you and asked a couple other people to kind of like look at this list and like, would you agree with that these are the 8 best players here? And after I did that, I basically had a hat or a container or something and put everybody else in that to be drawn from. So what I was going to do is have each of the captains come up. If I recall, you were one of the captains,
Oh,
and you
was?
guys
Oh,
were gonna.
cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
you were one of the captains because I was trying to think if it
Nice.
was you or Nick, but I think it was you. And I had the put everybody else's names in the hat, and then each of the captains was going to go up and draw 2 names, and that was going to be your partners. And I just remember because, there was always that anxiety, like who am I going to get paired with, right? But then like you see who people get paired with, and then there's sometimes they were friends and sometimes they weren't, and it was just like, oh, okay, cool, cool, whatever. And like I remember you got paired up with Nick, and I forgot who the other partner was. Um, but I think your team was one of the like the more stacked teams that I thought.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah, but that was basically the format for how I set that up. And I think one thing I overheard, I don't know if it was from Velociraptor or somebody else, but somebody else, I overheard somebody say like it's gonna end up coming down to the captains. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, ideally, like, I mean, that's what I want because then that means everybody's played, right? Like the whatever the other 2 people have played, and now it's down to the top players. And like that was kind of the secondary thing was to get people to play as much as possible, and then also for people to team up with, people that they wouldn't team up with, because like for Tucson, right? You'd expect for a team tournament, Velociraptor to come up, probably come up with Driftwood, maybe pair up with like with Trellix with Tyler, right? Like that would be like the one Tucson group. But now it was like, um, I failed to recall like who was on Velociraptor's team, but it was Velociraptor and like two other people that he would probably never pair up with. And part of that was like it was almost like the boot camp thing, right? Like I wanted to spur discussion or for you to like root, because you have an interest in the people on your team doing well because you want to win, right? So it's just like, maybe you and Nick are, batting heads at every tournament you run into, but for this tournament you're like, hey Nick, do that thing that you always do, or do whatever, right? This thing
Yeah,
that I always hate or whatever. You guys are coaching amongst each other and like, talking each other up.
it's a mixer.
And yeah, exactly. And like I think in a lot of way, like I remember just, when I saw like some of those like captains like rooting on, or like I'd see them walk up to one of the other players and be like, hey, give them some coaching advice. It's like I think I even said that on that day too. I was like, coaching's encouraged, like, help your teammates out, like you guys want to win, right? And that kind of thing. And it was just a kind of a fun, like, in a way, like you said, mixer, kind of like icebreaker event, because I wanted to just get people involved and like not just have that kind of like top heavy team that was gonna like run through everybody, right? Like I wanted people to play, and the camaraderie amongst each other. I think for prizes I gave out like the Street Fighter movie Blu-ray or something like that.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a tough one because like I echo John's sentiments in that yeah, it's gonna come down to the captains for the competitive stuff, and so the rest of the team is kind of like inconsequential.
Yeah.
But I've actually run an event in the opposite way where you make it so the team captain scores 1 point and then the other players score 1 point as well. And
Mm,
the issue is that um, if you weight them the same, then nobody's satisfied at the end of the tournament because they're like, well, we technically had better players. We just lost in all the different matchups. Like I read an event where we tried to balance it around that and make it not come down to the captains. And even that has drawbacks and makes it not very satisfying as well because people still are like,
yeah.
no, I think we had the player that would have beat your entire team. He won his match, but too bad he didn't get to play everybody else because we were waiting on them the same, you know?
Yeah.
So team tournaments are always really hard to run properly and actually get like a proper gauge of competition. And then at that point, you have to draw your line on whether or not you want it to be a social thing or you want it to
Mm,
be a competitive thing. And if it's a
yeah.
competitive thing, then the reality here is that the teams don't actually matter, and it's just ultimately who's the best player that day, and because they're going to run through everybody.
Yeah. But I mean, it was one of those things like that was just something that I wanted to do. Just the team tournament in itself.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I
Oh,
thought it
one
went
other
pretty well.
story about a team tournament is that this wasn't at yours, but the one you mentioned said 3S ran one prior, right?
Mhm.
And it was me and Jeff and Old Man River and Danny Mitsu, and
Oh, okay.
so we named our team Team Tucson, and it bothered Abe. I could tell it bothered Abe so much because we were like, we're Team Tucson, we're beating everybody. I think I had a run in with Tyler that tournament, and he beat the shit out of me, and I was really upset. And then Jeff ended up beating him. We actually got really far. I remember that we got really far as Team Tucson. It was pretty good. Anyway, that was
Yeah.
just reminiscing. Team Tucson
Yeah.
for
No,
life.
the one thing I remember about that tournament was like just the fact that it ran so long because of the format. I remember it ran into my team was eliminated. It was like me, um, who was it, Luminaire and Chiron, were
Oh, Team
two.
Scumbag, dude.
Yeah,
Team
two scumbags,
Scumbag.
two scumbags and a gentleman was a team name, I think.
Yeah, that was the
Um,
joke though. It was which one was the
yeah.
gentleman? Nobody fucking knew. We were all scumbags. I
But
remember that joke. Ah,
yeah, I just remember the main thing I remember was just the fact that it ran so long, because like I remember our
yeah.
team got eliminated and I was just like, I gotta go home. And like I went home and I went to go check out the stream, and it was like it was clocking in over midnight, and then like I was making jokes about like, man, I didn't know this was a 2-day tournament. I would have planned better, because like it just ran so long. But
Yeah.
I think those kind of events, they kind of have their place, sparingly in the scene. I don't think it's something that needs to be done regularly, but it's a good way to kind of mix things up. Uh, so that might be something I do amongst like whoever takes the mantle for like Randbats or like monthlies or something. That might just be something that, what, I just want to do a team tournament for like Street Fighter 6 and let me see who wants to come out and just play, that kind of thing. So that's something I might do in the one off because like I said, I don't know whether I want to be involved at all or how involved I want to be when Street Fighter 6 comes out. But, one off events, maybe like once a quarter or, once every 6 months or something like that might be something that I get involved in.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat where like I don't really want to run another event. I actually intend to be a very large part of the community, and like I intend to play a lot, and I intend to stream and stuff like that. But I don't think I think I'm past the era where I run tournaments, and frankly, there will be people I think who have already done it way better than I ever did, and they're
Yeah.
still around, and I think they'll keep doing better. So I'm hoping that, like, I hope that Rambats occurs. I wouldn't blame anybody if nobody picked that up. I
Yeah.
think in general we have a really big reckoning coming as far as what locals are
Yeah.
and what constitutes a local. If online actually meets or exceeds in some ways offline play, then
Yeah.
what is the point of a local? What's the point of a local community? There's all those kinds of questions that come out, and maybe we could get into that here, but I think that would be very long winded.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now that you bring that up, I guess that in some ways I could almost see maybe there could be a transition. So instead of like a bi-weekly thing, right? Because like if online's more viable, right? Like rollback and the conditions for it are things that people are happy with, right?
Yeah,
Like maybe they don't want to come out every 2 weeks, especially like um, if you're gonna end up being in the Ranbat mix, like for the points or for winning, right? Like you have to travel every 2 weeks, right? Like, whether that's Tucson, which isn't super far, but it's still travel, right? Every 2 weeks, it's like an hour and a
yeah,
half.
I wouldn't want to
I
do
mean,
that. Yeah,
it's 3 hours round trip. Then you got the guys from Yuma, guys from other scenes, even people coming from like the West Side, right? Like we get a lot of stuff in our group where it's just like, hey, is there anything happening on the West Side because the gaming zone's in Tempe and that's kind of out of my way, right?
yeah, I
So
hear
it's
that one
like
a lot. Yep.
maybe instead of like a biweekly thing, maybe it transitions into like a monthly thing. So that's a once a month thing that you would plan for, and maybe it doesn't even need to be Randbats. Maybe it's just there's a monthly that happens, and people will gravitate more to that because it's less frequent. But maybe those become like larger events per se, and instead of something that's more frequent
I think of
that
that, but I
becomes
also
something.
think about what does it mean to be a community, right? Where, okay, so yeah, once a month we have a local offline local, an offline local that you know at least in Street Fighter V's case right now, it's going to be on PS4 and PC is way
Oh,
better. PC online, in my
yeah,
opinion, is better than offline PS4. And so, if I'm somebody that doesn't have a stake in the community, which obviously that's not completely me, but it on a bad day where I don't feel like going outside, I would rather just play
yeah,
online. And then there's a point where it's like, well, also the better players in California, what if I have a better relationship with them than I do with my locals? What if
yeah,
I practice more with them online than I practice offline with the local scene? And what is the
yeah,
benefit of actually having locals at a certain point? Um, it's actually incredibly doom and gloom, and to the point that's actually why I don't want to run tournaments anymore. Is that I don't have
yeah.
an answer to that question.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's definitely something. I mean, I guess I haven't put too much thought into that in terms of that, because I don't know. For me, like it's always been about the community aspect and gathering people, that kind of thing. But yeah, I could definitely see like the convenience of staying at home and just playing online. And then I hadn't even thought about the fact that, like you said, like I mean, for the most part, I would hope that people have good connections to the SoCal scene, those kind of things. Like you said you play with like Alex Myers regularly, so it's just like, what benefit is there to playing locals other than maybe winning a cash prize that day, right? Versus I can get a good training session for 2 hours playing with somebody in SoCal that's of a higher level or something like that, right?
Yeah. So like
So
the people on that Ryu quest, the people who are just trying to be, they don't necessarily care about the community or they care about the social part of it, and they're just trying to get as good as possible at the video game. There's actually less incentive to come out to locals. There's less incentive to do that versus stay home, play online with with better players in a lot of ways.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
back in Street Fighter 4 era in the 2010s, we would have been like, well, you're playing an inferior game, but at least in the current era of fighting games, every fighting game runs better on PC than it does on PS4, to the point where it's actually running better online on on PC than it is on PS4. And I don't
Yeah,
know if that's going to change with Street Fighter 6 or with Tekken 8 or
yeah.
with PlayStation 5 becoming the de facto standard. I'm genuinely curious about where locals come back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a good point too. And then you got to think about like there's also like the cost in terms of like if you have a PC that runs Street Fighter 4 or Street Fighter 5 and you have a good experience with that online, then it's just like, what if do you need to buy a PS5? Do you need to invest in that kind of stuff? Whereas you could just buy Street Fighter 6 and, play it on your current setup, like, that's a whole nother thing that, might deter people. Cause like I'm kind of in that boat. Like I could play Street Fighter 5 right now just fine. I'm sure Street Fighter 6 will run fine on the PC I got, and it's just like I don't have any real incentive to want to go buy a PS5 and then go buy a stick or you know build a stick that has a Brooks board in it to work with that kind of stuff. Because that's you're looking at 700 $800 worth of investment just to play that one game. Like I could see a lot of people just not wanting to do that at all.
Yeah, yeah, and I hate to make it doom and gloom, but like I feel like, because I think part of what we wanted to talk about as part of this episode was like, what does it take to start up a local, right?
Yeah,
And there are a lot of questions that are relevant to today that I didn't have to worry about 10 years ago, to the point where I'm not sure. I'm not sure how, like, we can talk it through. Like
yeah.
okay, so if I wanted to start a local from scratch, right? What would be the first thing that we try to do? Um,
Well, for
like
for me, I would like one. I would probably try first gain interest in what people wanted to play, right? So
so pick a
what do
game,
people want to
right?
play? Yeah, pick a game or two or whatever you want to do, right? And then from there, it's like you got to secure a venue. So whether that's somebody's house, if that's really what comes down to it, which isn't necessarily the best option for a lot of people. Like some people are just like, well, why do I have to go to your house? Why isn't there like a public venue to go to? Especially like when you're talking about like some of the younger crowd that might get involved.
Hmm. Yeah,
Parents don't want to be like, where are you going? You want me to drop you where?
yeah,
Versus,
yeah.
oh, can you drop me at this gaming store? Can you drop me at this land center or this, this computer cafe or whatever?
And now we
Uh,
talked about, like, when we had Rick on the show too a couple episodes back, like he mentioned that he ran tournaments out of his apartment and crammed a ton of people there, right? But I think the big difference in today's era is that there's the FGC skews a lot younger, and so we
yeah,
do have those issues of like, what if you have minors coming over to your tournament? You know,
yeah,
like, can you have them at your house? Is that a good idea?
yeah,
Realistically, is that
yeah.
truly a good idea? Probably not.
Yeah, especially like, especially at your house or, or apartment or wherever you're having, like
Yeah.
more than likely it's gonna be more of a not necessarily a casual setting, but I mean you're gonna have, you could have alcohol there, you could have other things there that,
Yep.
that again, like that's where like somebody's parent or somebody can be like, no, I don't want you going over there. And then like, it becomes a deterrent for somebody to even attend an event.
Yeah,
So it's like,
because the other thing is, like, everybody talked about the concept of neutral ground as far as like a venue goes, and in reality here is like, say you really like playing games as part of the community, but the person who owns the house that runs the tournaments are run out of, you don't get along with them. Are you ostracized
yeah,
from the community now? And that's
yeah,
a real thing versus a business where you're paying money to be there. You have every right to be there just like anybody else.
yeah,
Um, so
yeah,
I guess,
that's a
yeah,
good point.
when you're picking a venue, to keep track of like what your age demographic is, and then keep track of how many people that venue can house, right?
Yeah, and then I mean, then you have the relationship with the vendor too, depending on where it's at.
Yeah.
Like we've hosted a lot of events at the Gaming Zone, which is for those that don't know, that's basically like a used gaming store slash like gaming lobby, uh, like arcade. right?
Yep.
So the pretty much like the gist of like what we've done with them is they just want a venue fee. Anybody that's coming in to play tournaments, you're gonna pay this flat venue fee of $10, and then you can enter whatever tournaments you want, and whatever fees or whatever might be associated with those are separate from us, just as long as we get our $10 or whatever for you coming into our place. So I mean, you've got that aspect. I mean, there's other places you can host stuff, if not, something gaming centric. Like, I think in Tucson, they go to a place called Mr. Heads, which I think is like a bar. I
Yep, it's
hadn't
a
really
bar.
looked into it. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, there's places like that that you could partner with, um, talk to the owners, and, you got to sell yourself on what you're doing, right? And say, hey, I'm wanting to host a video game tournament here. Is there a section of your place that we can have dedicated to us where we can set up things, um, and play? Like, is there some kind of like a minimum that you want us to deal with in terms of like, people got to buy food and snacks and patronize the business, like no outside stuff, those kind of things. I mean, you can get what's another venue? I was gonna say like free venues. Like I think Tucson was also hosting like out of the police station or somewhere like
Yeah, they have
something like
there's
that.
a community center in the police station that they would just meet there and bring their stuff to, right? Because the other aspects of a venue that you're going to need power, like so that way you can
Yeah,
actually run all the setups. And then if you want to stream your event, you're going to need a consistent internet connection, which
yeah,
at first glance you're like, oh, of course you would have an internet connection, but like if I've run an event at a restaurant before, and it's not easy to get a Cat 5 cable from their back office where the router is all the way to wherever
yeah,
your stream setup is.
yeah,
It's not easy to, and you can't run on Wi-Fi if you're streaming. You can't, and then making sure there's enough power outlets for all the setups as well as your stream, like all those
yeah,
different logistics, right? And with the gaming zone, we're really fortunate where they happen to have systems like PlayStations and monitors. But if you don't have your venue doesn't have that, like heads or like the police station, right? Who in the community is going to provide those setups for you?
yep,
You
exactly.
have to
Like
think
yeah,
about that too, right? And are you gonna, as the TO, are you gonna go and shell out a bunch of money for, like 5 PS5s and 5 gamer approved monitors, that are
yeah.
lagless,
Yeah, and then it's just like, yeah, I mean, if yeah, like that was the other thing I was gonna get to too, is like in terms of setups. Like if you don't have setups, then you're gonna have to rely on the community. Unless, I mean, most people probably aren't gonna bankroll that themselves, right? They're gonna ask the community, and either common thing in the past was always to kind of like give people a break on like their registration fee or their venue fee or something like that, right? Like I'll cover your venue fee if you bring me a setup,
Yep.
right?
But even that, you have
And
to negotiate that with the venue as well to be like, you need to let these people in because they're helping run the event technically, right?
exactly,
Because the
yeah.
venue's basically taking the hit on that front.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, those are things to consider too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
and then
and to be constructive, like I think raw numbers wise, like if you're looking to run an 8-man tournament, you're not going to need more than 2 setups. If you're
yeah,
looking to run, I would say all the way up to a 24-man bracket, you could probably get by on 2 setups. It'd just be slow. But then
yeah,
anything above 24, if you're in 32 territory, you definitely want to have 3 to 4 setups instead.
yeah.
And then
That oh, yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say the thing that kinda, like, even spurned, this conversation, or me even thinking about this, was just the fact that in our Facebook group, there's, occasionally there'll be somebody randomly from, I don't know, some random city like Prescott or something, like, "Hey, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere. I can't make it to Phoenix or Tucson. Like, how should I get started doing things?" So, yeah, it's more of like a yeah, just on our experiences, like on my own experience, just working with venues and doing those kind of things in terms of securing setups. Like you got to talk to you got to be willing to kind of put yourself out there and reach out to people in the community. Hey man, like you're a big Street Fighter player. Do you think you can bring a setup? And like that's all stuff you got to coordinate. um what's the other thing I was getting to? Oh, in terms of like with those setups, like you got to take into account like whether people might end up leaving, like, or they need to leave, right? Most
Yeah,
people
they'll
aren't
take
going to
the
be like,
setup
oh
with them.
yeah, yeah, they're going to take their setup. They're not going to leave you with their console and their monitor and whatever, and like, oh yeah, I'll come get it later. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna be ready to take that. So that's something you got to take into account too. Like how long are you going to be here? Uh, those kind of things, like the time constraints. Those are pretty big things to think about.
Yeah, and I don't want to get on a soapbox about, because it's a really common tiny violin to play for a TO to be like, oh, TO is a thankless job, and we put in all this time and then nobody appreciates it, all that other bullshit, right? Like that is a very real thing, but at the same time, like everybody complains about that, and you kind of know what you're signing up for when you get into being a TO, and that it's not
Yeah.
going to be fun, and a lot of times you're going to deal with a lot of people's egos.
Mm,
But the reality is that if you are like I think what I'm trying to bring up by asking all these questions, and I think what you're bringing up as well, Benny, is that if you know what you're getting into, it's going to be a lot of hard work, and
yeah.
it's not going to be as simple as if I just start this venture, then I have the potential to make a lot of money on it because esports is booming right now. It's more
Yeah.
so that like you have to think about all these extra things, because everything you don't think about makes the tournament worse, and makes it worse for the players as well, and makes it worse for the community as a whole.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, and on I was gonna say that on a side note, like you don't even need to run tournaments per se. Like, I mean, you may not get enough people at your smaller local to run a tournament or want to run a tournament. Like, it can honestly just be like a public casual session, right? Like, you can just get enough people there, and maybe people don't wanna play in a tournament. You
yeah,
could just be like, just run like casual King of the Hill kind of arcade type setups, and be like, oh, winner gets next kind of thing.
my
So
golden
it's
rule
less
is
like,
that if we have a casual session and it's under if it's under 8 people and they want to run a tournament, then we run a round robin instead. And if it's over
yeah,
8, then we run a double elim bracket. But if it's under 8, there's no like at that point it's less about getting the competitive experience and more about getting as many games in as possible in a structured way where something actually matters, where the result matters.
yeah,
So round robins are a really good substitute for that. So like, you mentioned, people posting in our Facebook group about like, hey, I'm up in Prescott and I want to start an FGC. That's where I would start is
yeah,
let's make an event and be ready for a low turnout. So prep for maybe 2
yeah,
setups, right? Bring 2
yeah,
setups max. And then from there, if it's above 8, run your double limb bracket, run the bracket you always dreamed of. But if not, adapt to it and then play a round robin instead, and make sure that the people that do show up have a reason to come back to the next one, and then you slowly grow.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's something that I've seen in some, like, Facebook events. Like, people will even preface that in their thing. Like, if we get 8 people, then I think my friends in Alaska do that. Like, though, if we get this many people, we'll run a round robin. Or if we don't get this many people, we'll run a round robin. If we get more, then yeah, we'll run a double elim or whatever and go from there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something like, set expectations for like the people that may be coming, so that they know, like you said, like you're gonna start small. Like, I hope that, if you're starting a local, you wouldn't expect like 20 people to show up.
But I think a lot of people do, honestly. I think when they get into the TO mindset, right? Oftentimes it's either because they're a former player and they're familiar with the community, or they're from outside the community and they're like, I want to run esports numbers, I want to run a major, I want to run Evo, right? And they come in with really high expectations, and they get maybe like 20 people to come out, maybe.
Yeah,
Oftentimes it's under like 5 people because they didn't advertise it or something, or
yeah,
the tournament was run on poor equipment. Um, and then they get discouraged because they shell out a bunch of money for a venue or something, expecting 1 million people to show up, and in reality, it's not as simple as that.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I think that it's important to recognize when your attendance list is going to be artificially increased versus when it's going to be increased based on the product that you offer. Um,
yeah,
what will happen when Street Fighter 6 comes out, or when any new fighting game comes out, is everybody's going to be fiending for tournaments. And
yeah,
so I expect Street Fighter 6 tournaments to break 40 people in Arizona. 40 is even a very, very conservative number, because we've gone, I think we hit 65 once for Street Fighter 5.
yeah.
So
The Street
I
Fighter Five launch tournament. Yeah,
right. I expect a huge uptick in tournament numbers, but then what's going to happen is everybody's going to be trying to get in on that, and they're going to fragment the scene and split it up. And then you're also going to be battling against that aforementioned pandemic locals online issue, where are locals ever actually truly going to come back? And so temper your expectations when you get into the scene. Expect to get I would temper it to be around 8 people. And if you financially can't find that viable, then it
yeah,
might not be a good look. Or at least if you financially don't find that viable and you're not willing to lose the money on it, then like it sounds like you probably weren't really interested in running the tournaments in the community anyway. I know that's a little harsh,
Yeah.
but like you got to be willing to take the loss at the beginning. And if you're not, then that's more power to you and that's fine, but know what you're getting
Yeah.
into. Eyes wide open, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't even necessarily need to take a loss. I mean, it's just like, if in anything, it could just be like, it's just not anything that you're gonna gain monetarily from, right? Maybe
Yeah.
initially, like it'll just be, I got setups here, I got a venue secured, the venue's getting paid, the players are putting their money into the prize pot, and it's just like there's no other stream of income for you, right? It's you're there to set everything up and to put everything together. And it's like, it's not like somebody's gonna be like, "Hey man, here, thanks for doing this. Here's $20," right? Unless you have a deal with the venue to do that. For me personally, I always kind of just did things for the community. So any events that I ran was like I wasn't worried about like I've had venues ask like, "Oh, what do you want your cut to be from like the venue fee?" And I'm like,
Sure.
I
Yeah.
don't need a cut. Like this is just something I want to do, and if it helps you guys out, great. And I'm not looking to get anything out of this other than bringing people together, kind of thing.
I've
So
actually negotiated a cut with the venue before where like
mm,
it was I won't name the venue, but it was a $5 venue fee and then I took $1 of it. And
mm.
so I made $30 that day for an 8 hour day. Like it didn't even remotely cover my time, let alone my the cost of
Exactly. Oh yeah,
all the
the time.
setups and
Yeah,
stuff like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um
That's a big thing too. Yeah, and the
yeah,
the
because my
time that you
y-
put.
yeah. And so I don't know. Again, like don't go into it expecting you're going to make a ton of money because I think that people see Evo and they're like, I'm going to make as much money as Evo does, and then they immediately go to the attendees because that's the
Yep.
numbers that people see. They're like, oh, Evo brought in 6,000 people this year, right? And the
Yeah.
reality here is those 6,000 people are paying a venue fee, but that's not where you're making your money. You're making your money off of the stream and off of the advertising revenue and off of the sponsors from the relationships with the big companies that you have and the booths that are there and whatnot. And if you're running a local tournament, you're not going to have any of that. Any of that.
Yep.
So the main revenue stream for these big dogs and these big majors that you're trying to emulate, you're not going to have that. And so you have to be okay with that and be willing to take whatever comes with that, whatever cost comes with that, really.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
what I see a lot of organizers do then is they double back and say, all right, well, if I don't have access to that stuff, I'm going to instead try to just focus on getting money from the people that do show up, like the players. And the players really don't have that money and they don't have that sustainable revenue stream for you because they could enter the tournament, have a shitty time, and decide not to come back next time. And then you're out
Exactly.
on that, and you're still paying the same venue fee. You're still paying the same expenses that you were. Um,
Yep.
so that's just my giant word of caution. Anybody trying to get in on it, and then to the
Mhm.
players, like the word of caution is when you are attending these tournaments, like keep track of how they are monetizing it, what their business model looks like. Because
Yeah. Exactly.
if
Yep.
it's like, hey, I'm going to charge you $30 and then you get a free drink or something to if you win, like
Mhm.
think about whether or not the $30 is worth your time. If it's part of versus getting casual somewhere else or getting at a tournament that actually pays out. And that may or may not be
Yeah.
the case. That might be the only show in town, in which case that's the way to go. But
Yeah.
we've debated a long time about what prize structures look like, about what the venue fees look like. Like I think Benny, you touched on that briefly, being like, make sure you keep the venue fee separate from the prize pot, right?
Yeah.
That's a
Exactly. Yeah.
huge
So
thing. Go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. I was just that's something I wanted to touch on, just in terms of like, especially like when Street Fighter 6 comes out, you're gonna have, um, people that maybe you've never heard of in the scene, kind of start promoting something like, "Hey, I'm running this tournament at this whatever." Like, I think one thing I've seen recently in the last couple of years is like these vape places or something like that, or these like hookah lounges and stuff like that. They're like, "Hey, we're running a tournament here," and it's just like, "What's the entry fee? $10, $20 to get in and to get put into the bracket," and then naturally, like me, I always look at like, well, what's the price structure?
Yeah.
Because from running tournaments myself and participating, like typically, all the money that I'm paying into to entry supposed to go into the prize pot, right? And then that gets split up, whether like top three, whatever percentage, 70, 30, 10, or 70, 20, 10, however you want to put it, right? So when I see these places that are like, hey, it's $20 to get in, okay, first prize is going to be these. They advertise them as iPods, but they're not like actual Apple iPods. They're like some generic Amazon ones that were like $30, right? And then it's like, oh, then you can get, we'll be giving out a GameStop gift card, or we'll be giving out this. And for me, like what I do, I start breaking down, like you said, almost like the business model as a structure, because I'm like, okay, if I'm putting $20 into this, and let's say 10 people show up, right? That's $200, right? And then I start looking at, well, what is this guy giving out? And it's like, well, if he's giving out these generic iPods, okay, that's like $30, $20 gift card, and then it's just like, okay, where's that other $150 going? Is that just money that he pocketed, or whatever, right? Like, I don't know. To me, like, I don't necessarily want to say that those are like the most shady events, but that's always kind of how I break things down in terms of me, because it's like I expect the money that I put into a tournament to hopefully come back to me in some form, and and a good percentage of that, not for like half of it to be distributed, or just half of it to be cash for the organizer. Because that's one thing I'll always question. I was like, I've done it in our group itself. I'm just like, hey, I noticed these headphones that you had, these iPods or whatever. These aren't actual Apple iPods, or Apple. What do you call them?
AirPods,
Apple earpods. Yeah, they're not actual
AirPods.
Apple earpods. So you know, I looked these up. These cost this much. So like, where's the rest of this money going, or what, something like that? And maybe I mean, maybe that's not the best way to go about it, but it's like it's something that I personally question, because I'm like, where's this money going that I'm hoping to like win back or double my money or whatever. You know what I mean?
It's a philosophical thing too, because like the way the gaming zone operates, and that was after like a lot of consultation with the community, is that it's a $10 venue fee and then $5 tournament entry, just as a hypothetical, right?
Yeah,
And so they just keep the raw $10, and the $5 goes to a tournament pot, and that's the number that gets split amongst top three, right? And so to the average player, that's really clean cut, right? But what I think a
yeah,
lot of venues try to do, and they make the mistake of doing, is they say, all right, well, it's a $20 flat fee, and then we're going to take a percentage of the pot, and then you're going to get a smaller percentage of the pot. And to it doesn't, like, fundamentally, or rather, it's a $15 fee, right? So fundamentally, the players are still paying the same amount of money, and they're actually getting awarded the same amount of money, but it feels
yeah,
worse because you're like, no, like, the venue is taking part of my accomplishment as somebody who plays top three. And so you
yeah,
have to like separate them, so that way your consumers are really satisfied with uh it's
yeah.
optics. It's philosophical optics.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's true. Because like, if you think about it, because like that was a discussion with Evo too that I saw on Twitter. It was like, people are like, man, I'm paying $75, $85 for this venue fee, and
Hmm.
it's just like they want to see like the value in what they're paying for with that. Because a
Yeah.
lot of people, they don't see, like, especially for these larger events, like there's a ton of costs that go into. I mean that's going beyond like the local scene, but that's something that a lot of people don't think about. So it's like, but at the end of the day, people want value for like what they're putting in. So it's just like, if whether that's a $10 venue fee, $5 venue fee, a $75 venue fee, what am I getting out of that particular portion of it, other than the price pot, right?
Yep.
Because you might not make it in the money for the prize pot, but okay, so what did my money go towards? Like, is this a, like you said, time wise, was this a good environment, like this bar or this restaurant or whatever it's at, or this gaming place? Like, is this a good place that I want to support and put my money towards?
Yeah, and by no means are we saying that like that it's evil to make money off of running a tournament. Like it's
Yeah,
still like that's how you grow the tournament series, and that's how you grow the community in a lot of ways, is that there has to be some form of income there. I think the kicker is whether or not that money is coming from the players and how much of it is
yeah,
coming from the players, because after a while you tap this community dry, then you either cut and run or you find another way to grow the scene a little bit more. And a lot of people cut and run.
yeah.
Um, I think another thing from the player standpoint on how to like be defensive and watching for quote unquote shady tournaments is just look at the equipment that they run on. Um,
Hmm.
like if they're running it on, and I've seen this throughout the years, is like you'll get invited to a tournament, and you'll go to the tournament and it's run on a bunch of TVs that
Yeah,
people would have in their living room, these big plasma LCD screen TVs, right?
yeah.
And
Hmm.
they're really laggy, or they're running on a system that's not competitive standard. Like there's one time I think I saw a PlayStation Marvel 3 tournament run, and it's like, well, half the community doesn't have a PS3 stick, so it was kind of
Yeah.
like, what do we do with this, um, and then they were charging money, and it was just a little difficult to really rationalize that experience when it was subpar for what other TOs would offer from within the community that favor the competitive scene.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah, I was gonna say that's a big thing too because it's like to the everyday, like, kinda casual person, like, if I was to go talk to my neighbor and talk about video games or something, right? They'll be like, "Oh yeah, I play on this 72-inch screen or this projector," right? And
mhm.
I'm like, "That's gotta be laggy as hell, right?" But, for the competitors, like, yeah, that's something you gotta take into account too. Like you said, like, I mean, I've seen that plenty of times too. Like, hey, we're hosting this tournament, and then it's on a console that's like, yeah, like you said, PS3, like it's last generation, or it's like, uh, it could be something that's not the ideal format or the competitive standard. And
Yep.
then it's one of those things like, yeah, it ends up being like a bad experience, or you're kind of like questioning, like, I don't wanna say, like, people have bad intentions because I don't think, obviously everybody doesn't have bad intentions. Some people just wanna host something, and that might be what they have access to, right? Like, if I host a cross Tekken tournament, I'm not gonna have PC setup, so it's like, "Hey, guys, I got a 360. Do you guys got 366 to work with this?" That kinda thing.
And they
But
might
that's
not.
where
Yeah.
yeah, exactly, and that's where, like, you're gauging of the community in terms of, like, what they're playing and, what console is the standard. Like, I'm, like, real like, I don't try to put a barrier to, like, do people that wanna get into this. It's more just like, or even, like, what their reasons are. It's just like, if I see that there's, like, good communication and feedback coming back, like, from your discussion in your Facebook event or whatnot, then, at that point, like, I feel like you have good intentions, and it's like you're trying to do what's best for not just yourself, but also for, like, the people that you're hoping to get to your tournament or to your local, right?
I think that's a really
And
good point, Benny, is that like, we talked about like all these red flags for tournaments, but the
Mhm,
reality here is that sometimes people are just really passionate and they just want to get into it and they want to try it.
mhm,
And then if it doesn't work out, they want to improve on it. So it might be as simple as just telling them that. So you might run into, like, I remember there was a comic book shop that ran in tournaments and they ran on these really laggy TVs. And it was
mhm,
not a good tournament experience, but you could tell it's a comic book shop. They really just wanted to get foot traffic in there and they wanted to like cater to the community scene and everything. And
yep,
they just wanted to run a good event. And so I told them, here's where you could improve. And they listened. And we had a couple more tournaments there. I've also had run into venues before that didn't listen and were like, no, this is the way it's going to be. And if you don't like it, you
yeah,
don't have to show up. And then those tournaments aren't running anymore because the competitive scene by and large was like, no, this isn't worth it.
exactly,
So
yeah,
like the TO could just be trying their best, and if you give them the benefit of the doubt and inform them on what community standards are, if there are any anymore, um,
yeah.
and they can either accept that or they can try to spearhead it their own way and then hope that the community doesn't end up blacklisting them.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's probably gonna be the last thing I touch on was just like, you bringing up that example about the comic book shop. It's like there was a gaming land place that ran some, I think, Dragon Ball and Street Fighter tournaments at one point, and
Hmm.
they have, their setup is, it's to the casual viewer, it looks awesome, right? Like you have a gaming chair in front of this big TV that you're sitting in front of, right? And probably like a 30-inch or something like that, 40-inch TV, and like from the outside, the casual person looking in, it's a gaming center. Oh, this is awesome setup. All my friends can have their own stations, kind of thing, right? But for like the fighting game community, that's not ideal at all, right? Or the type of TV that was being used was not ideal, and like
Yep.
they had a good turnout, but then it was just like, well, this isn't normally what we play on. But then, like you said, from a business standpoint, for those kind of people, like they've already invested in what they thought or what they wanted and what they envisioned for their business and what they want this to look like to the public. And it's like, well, this is what we have to work with. I'm not going to go buy these monitors or stuff that you guys need for your stuff. And you've either got to be okay with that and not having that like the hardcore scene going to those events, because it's like, the majority of them aren't going to go there. Like you're probably going to be, if you've attempted to reach out to the FGC but you're not willing to make make the sacrifices and make the purchases that are gonna cater to that scene, then it's just like, I mean, you can't really expect them to show up. And I think,
Yeah, and it might
um,
not be as simple as like, go out and buy the monitors that we want. It could be something like work with the community and have them bring the monitors because they definitely have them,
yeah,
right?
exactly, yeah. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, if you're gonna be able to accommodate, things in that way, you could be more successful. That's why, like, a lot of times we've been super fortunate to have the gaming zone and um, the way that they've run things because they've been uh, perceptive or respect or what's the word I'm thinking receptive to
Receptive,
feedback
yeah.
from the community in terms of like, hey, what monitor should we get, what system should we run this on, because we want, to have the stuff that you guys need here without you guys having to bring your own stuff.
Yep.
And I think, obviously, like, the pandemic and other things probably factored into it, but you know, during the time that, things were thriving, like that made it super easy to run events and do things there, because then it was just a matter of like, hey, can I secure a date here? And it's just like, it's an incentive for them to get people in, so it's just like, yeah, you can have this date. We're not doing anything, or there's no birthday party going on here. So yeah,
Yeah.
you can have the venue there, and they have all the setups and everything. You don't have to worry about that. You just got to be, from there, it's promoting your event and getting people out there.
My last little anecdote for this episode would be a tournament that um the wackiest tournament, the tournament that I tell people about when I'm telling stories at bars and stuff is there was a Marvel 3 tournament that was run at a strip club. It's actually down the street from where I live now, coincidentally.
Oh, it's funny you
Yeah.
bring that up because I think as I was scouring the SRK forums, I think I
Yeah.
ran into something about that.
And so, the strip club's business model is less so about, making sure that they collect a venue fee and more about making sure that the entertainment gets the tips they want, right? And it was on a Sunday afternoon, so you were getting the B team for sure. But the cool thing about that tournament is that I believe it was free entry. Obviously, I could have gone and gotten the buffet or something if I wanted to, but all the actual setups were run on, like, they were hooked up to the stage, and then they were running Asus monitors with 360 setups, so they were running tournament standard equipment while there was entertainment hanging out above us. And so I ended up winning that tournament just on a weird technicality. I forget why. I got like a $25 Best Buy gift card from a strip club tournament, and then my friend Sean actually got one of the numbers from somebody who worked there. um, he's happily married now. That didn't end up panning out or anything. Sorry, Azza,
Yeah.
for bringing that up. But like it doesn't have to be like that. Like, we talk about shady organizers. I want to be clear in that the venue itself wasn't shady or anything like that. That was a really well run tournament. It was very clear about what their definitions for the prizes were. They were clear about what their business model is for why you were there, and the equipment that they ran on was tournament standard. And so I laugh about how funny of a situation that story is, but it was honestly a really good tournament, and those are the kind of memories that you want in your tournaments, honestly.
Yeah. That's funny. Like, yeah, like I said, like I was looking through the Sure You Can forums, looking for random stuff that I would have posted or from the AZ scene. Like that was something that I like stumbled upon, and I was just like, what was this? Like, what is this
Yeah.
talking about? So
Shout
for you
outs
to
to
shed light on that.
shout outs to the Devastation crew. They don't tend to get a lot of praise in the history of our scene, and that's unfortunate. But I do think that they ran a really good event there. They ran several of good events throughout the history of our scene, and hopefully we'll get a chance to touch on them in the future.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, this is a good discussion. I think we're gonna pick up again on Thursday, which is the 18th. And
Yeah,
again, like yeah, I talked about it last time briefly, but yeah, we're gonna be talking to Daniel Dragon Ninja about Dead or Alive and uh, stuff like that. So yeah, it's good talking to you again, John.
yeah. Take care, Benny. It was nice talking to you about our past experiences and whatnot, and I'm looking forward to talking to you more about that on the 18th.
All right, man. Have a good one.
See ya. I just spilled my beer everywhere.